My name is Natalie Carrington. Before I tell you the story, a story about clay and silence, about roots and letting go, I want to thank you for being here in this quiet space with me. There's a particular kind of strength that comes from being witnessed, a warmth that can travel across any distance. So, if you're listening, perhaps you could leave a simple hi in the comments below, or tell me what small corner of the world you're in today. It helps to know that these words aren't just echoing into the void. And if my story resonates with a part of you, please consider subscribing. Sometimes, the quiet encouragement of strangers is the very thing that helps us find our way home to ourselves. Thank you. Now, let me take you back to the beginning. The day they officially unfamiliared me, they did it with a paper plate. It was a Sunday afternoon, a gathering at the old Mallister house to sort through mother's things. Everyone else, my Aunt Clara, my cousin Hudson, his wife Kylie, even their children, ate from the heavy, cream-colored porcelain that had been in our family for generations. I was handed a flimsy paper plate, the kind you use for a child's birthday party. "There's a chair for you by the laundry room, dear," Clara said, her voice smooth as polished silver, her eyes not quite meeting mine. She gestured toward a solitary folding chair pushed against the humming dryer. Hudson didn't look up from carving the roast. Kylie offered a tight, pitying smile that didn't reach her eyes. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that crawled up my neck. But the worst part wasn't the plate or the chair. The worst part was that I went. I took the plate, filled it with a small portion of food I didn't want, and sat on that rickety chair by the laundry room, listening to the muffled sounds of their laughter and conversation through the wall. I sat there because I still believed, foolishly, that if I could just be quiet enough, small enough, they might eventually make room for me again. That night, back in the small cottage I rented on the edge of town, I didn't cry. I washed the porcelain dish I'd brought home for my own dinner, scrubbing it until my knuckles were raw. The ache in my chest was deep and hollow, a cavern carved out not by the single act of cruelty, but by the lifetime of subtle dismissals that had led to it. It was in the way they looked through me, as if I were a ghost in my own life story. I wish I could say I stood up and stormed out of their house that day. I didn't. I stayed until the end, helping to clear the real plates from the real table, my own paper plate already discarded in the trash. I stayed because I thought dignity meant quiet endurance. I was wrong. Dignity, I would learn, is not about how much you can bear in silence. It's about knowing when to speak, when to stand, and when to build a wall so high they can never touch you again. The spring my mother, Lillian, died was a cold, reluctant one in the hills of Asheville. A persistent mist clung to the mountains, blurring the edges of the world and making everything feel muted and heavy. The funeral was a performance of grief, orchestrated by my mother's sister, my Aunt Clara. I stood at the back of the small crowd gathered under a white tent, near a line of ancient, dripping pines. I wasn't wearing black. I wore a simple gray dress and my old work boots, speckled with the red clay that had become my life's work and the source of their quiet disdain. No one spoke to me directly. There were a few stiff nods, the kind reserved for strangers, not for the only child of the woman they were supposedly mourning. Clara delivered the eulogy, her voice a well-rehearsed melody of sorrow and strength. She spoke of Lillian as a devoted sister, a beloved member of the Mallister clan, a keeper of the family legacy. She painted a portrait of a woman I barely recognized, a woman whose life had been neatly edited to fit their narrative. In that narrative, I did not exist. I was a footnote they had collectively agreed to erase. After the service, as people milled around offering condolences to one another, I saw my cousin Hudson in a hushed, intense conversation with a man in a suit. Hudson held a rolled-up survey map, and even from a distance, I could see a section of land circled in red. It was a piece of the old Carrington property, land that had belonged to my mother's side of the family, land she had always dreamed of turning into a lavender farm. A cold knot of dread tightened in my stomach. Hudson's eyes held no grief, only a sharp, calculating glint I knew all too well. I approached Clara, not to confront her, but to say something. I don't even know what. But before I could speak, she turned to me, her voice a venomous whisper. "You have no right to be here, Natalie. You walked away from this family when you dropped out of law school to go play in the dirt. You're not one of us anymore." Her words struck me with the force of a physical blow. I stood there, speechless, as she turned her back on me and walked away. On the large wreath of white lilies laid across my mother's grave, a small, elegant card was tucked among the blossoms. The inscription, in Kylie's looping cursive, read, "From her loving Mallister family." They had not only erased me from the eulogy, they had written me out of their love. I walked back to my car, the fine mist settling on my skin like a second layer of grief. I didn't cry. It felt as if my capacity for tears had been exhausted years ago, worn down by 1,000 smaller cuts. But as I drove away from the cemetery, away from the cold granite that bore my mother's name, but not mine, a quiet, unfamiliar resolve began to take root in the barren soil of my heart. If I wasn't a Mallister, if I wasn't one of them, then I had to become something else. Something entirely my own. In the weeks that followed, I dismantled my old life with a quiet, methodical precision. I sold my small condo in the city, my car, the sensible suits I'd bought for a law career I never wanted. I traded it all for a small pile of cash and the freedom of having nothing left to lose. My new home was a rundown cedar cabin on a forgotten road deep in the southern hills, a place where the cell signal was a myth and the nights were filled with the sound of wind in the pines. It was a world away from the polished, suffocating elegance of the Mallisters. The floors creaked, the pipes groaned, and the solitude was so profound it was almost a physical presence. But it was mine. I bought a second-hand kiln, bags of local clay, and a set of sculpting tools I'd dreamed of for years. My days fell into a simple rhythm, chopping wood in the cool mornings, my hands growing calloused and strong, working at my wheel in the afternoons, the soft, wet clay spinning between my palms, and spending the evenings on the porch, wrapped in an old quilt, watching the stars emerge one by one in the vast, dark sky. My first creations were clumsy and misshapen. Bowls collapsed, vases cracked in the firing. The failures were constant, and the loneliness was a heavy cloak. One night, overwhelmed by a sense of futility, I took a small, lopsided vase, still damp from the wheel, and scratched 2 words into its surface with a pin. Not family. After it was fired, the heat of the kiln had smoothed the glaze, and the words were almost invisible, a ghost of a scar beneath the surface. I kept it. It became a quiet testament to the wound I was trying to transform. I didn't seek an audience. I posted a few photos of my work on an obscure online ceramics forum, not expecting anything to come of it. I was no longer trying to earn a place at their table. I was simply trying to build my own. Then, one rainy Tuesday, an email appeared in my inbox. The subject line read, "An invitation, the Penland School of Craft." It was from the director of their prestigious Artist-in-Residence program. "Miss Carrington," it began, "we came across your work on a small online forum and were struck by its raw, honest emotionality. We would like to formally offer you a place in our fall residency program. There is no fee. We simply wish to offer you the space, time, and community to continue your work." I read the email 3 times, convinced it was a mistake, a cruel joke. But it was real. Someone had seen me. Not the runaway law student, not the black sheep of the Mallister clan, but an artist. In that moment, sitting alone in my creaky cabin, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. Perhaps I wasn't invisible after all. Perhaps I had just been standing in the wrong light. The 2 months at Penland were a revelation. I was surrounded by other makers, people who understood the language of creation, the sacred alchemy of turning raw materials into something beautiful. We shared meals, critiqued each other's work with a fierce but gentle honesty, and stayed up late into the night, talking about art and life and the fires that drove us. For the first time, I felt like I belonged, not because I shared a bloodline with anyone, but because I shared a passion. At the end of the residency, the school hosted a craft fair. I displayed my work on a simple wooden table, my heart pounding with a familiar anxiety. By the end of the day, I had sold nearly every piece. People, strangers, paid money for the things I had made with my own 2 hands. They saw value in my work, in me. I drove back to my cabin with an empty truck and a full heart. I had built something, however small, from the ashes of my old life. A year had passed since the funeral, since Clara's cutting words. My small online shop had a slow but steady stream of orders. I was teaching a weekly pottery class at a community art center in a nearby town. I was saving money, not for any grand purpose, but for a half-remembered dream. It was a dream my mother had planted in me years ago, on a drive through the countryside. She had pointed to a dilapidated red farmhouse on a hill and said, if I ever had a place of my own, I'd plant lavender there. Fields of it. Can you imagine the scent, Natalie? On a whim one afternoon, I drove out that way, following the ghost of that memory. The farmhouse was still there, even more weathered than I remembered. The roof was a patchwork of rust and faded paint, the fence collapsing into a field of weeds. But as I got closer, I saw a small, tarnished bronze plaque near an old hand pump well, half buried in the overgrown grass. I knelt and brushed away the dirt. Engraved on its surface were 3 initials, L.R.C. Lillian Rose Carrington. My mother. My breath caught in my throat. This wasn't just a random farmhouse. This was hers. Or it had been. A quick search of the county records revealed the story. The property had belonged to my maternal grandmother, Ruth Carrington, and had never been absorbed into the Mallister family estate. It was separate, untouched, a part of my heritage that they hadn't been able to claim or corrupt. It was currently owned by the bank, sitting in foreclosure for years. A fierce, protective determination rose up in me. I would buy it. I took on every commission I was offered. I worked day and night, my hands constantly covered in a fine film of clay dust. I lived on coffee and toast and the singular, burning focus of my goal. It took me 6 months, but I scraped together enough for the down payment. I used every penny of my savings, every dollar earned from my art. I bought it on my own, with no loans, no co-signers, no one to answer to but myself. The day I signed the final papers, I drove up to the farmhouse. The air smelled of pine and damp earth. I walked through the tall grass, my boots sinking into the soft ground. I took out the small, scarred vase I had made in my cabin, the one with the ghost words "not family" etched into its side. I placed it gently on the stone step of the front porch. It was an offering, a promise. I stood in the middle of the overgrown field, the wind whipping my hair across my face, and I whispered to the empty air, "I'm home, Mom." This land wasn't just a piece of property. It was a foundation. A place where I could finally, truly, plant my own roots. The farm, which I christened Carrington Hill, slowly came back to life under my hands. The first year was a blur of hard work and quiet joy. I repaired the leaky roof, sanded and sealed the old pine floors, and planted the first rows of lavender in the field my mother had dreamed of. The house began to breathe again. My pottery studio, set up in the airy, light-filled barn, became the heart of my world. My online shop, now called Carrington Clay, flourished. My work, once born of solitude and pain, began to take on a new quality, a sense of peace, of rootedness. I adopted 2 rescue dogs, a scruffy terrier mix I named Salt, and a gentle, gray-eyed hound I called Indigo. They were my constant companions, their presence a warm, living comfort in the quiet of the country. Life settled into a gentle, pleasing rhythm. Mornings were for coffee on the porch, watching the mist burn off the hills. Afternoons were for my hands in the clay, the steady whir of the wheel a kind of meditation. Evenings were for the warm, orange glow of the kiln firing in the barn. I was alone, but I was not lonely. I had built a life that fit me, a life where my quiet nature was not a shortcoming, but a source of strength. It was on a crisp Friday afternoon in early October, for years after I had bought the farm, that the past arrived on my doorstep, uninvited. I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway and looked up from my wheel to see a large, black SUV pulling up to the house. My heart gave a sudden, hard jolt. Clara, Hudson, and Kylie emerged, followed by their 3 children. They were dressed in expensive weekend wear, looking for all the world like a page from a glossy lifestyle magazine. They carried suitcases. Clara smiled, a bright, manufactured smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Natalie, dear, we were in Asheville for a conference on preserving family heritage and just had to stop by. We thought we'd surprise you." Before I could find my voice, Kylie was herding her children past me into the house. "Oh, it's just lovely, Natalie. So rustic," she exclaimed, her eyes scanning the living room with a critical, appraising gaze. Hudson followed, running a hand over the restored wooden doorframe of the barn studio. "Good bones," he murmured, more to himself than to me. "You could really open this space up. Imagine a great room here, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the valley." I stood frozen in the doorway, my hands still damp with clay, a feeling of surreal dread washing over me. This wasn't a visit. It was an invasion. One of their children, a little girl with her mother's sharp eyes, tugged on Kylie's sleeve. "Mommy, is this our new country house?" Kylie laughed, a light, tinkling sound. "Well, that's something we'll all have to discuss with your Aunt Natalie, won't we, sweetie?" That evening was a masterclass in passive aggression. They moved through my home as if they were assessing it for purchase. Clara reorganized my spice rack. Kylie pointed out all the ways the house wasn't child-safe. Hudson spent most of the evening on his tablet, looking up property values in the area. At dinner, which they cooked in my kitchen, using my pots and pans, Clara looked around the dining room with a sigh. "You know, this house has such a wonderful feeling," she said. "It just seems to be calling out for the laughter of a real family, doesn't it?" The implication was clear. I was not a real family. I was just a placeholder. Later, Hudson brought up the idea of upgrades. I could front the capital for some renovations, he offered magnanimously. Modernize the plumbing, maybe add a guest wing. We could work out a shared ownership agreement based on my investment. Ownership. There it was. The reason for their sudden, suffocating appearance. They had seen what I had built. They had seen its value, not its emotional value, but its monetary worth, and they had come to claim their share. That night, after I had retreated to my bedroom and locked the door, I sat on the edge of my bed, my dogs pressed close against me, and I wrote down every word, every veiled insult, every casual suggestion that was really a demand. I was not the same woman who had sat on a folding chair by the laundry room. I had built this life from the ground up, with my own hands, on my own terms, and I would not let them take it from me. The quiet, peaceful sanctuary I had so painstakingly created had been breached, and I knew, with a certainty that was as cold and hard as stone, that this was not a family reunion. It was the beginning of a siege. The first week of their occupation was a slow, creeping suffocation. My quiet, ordered life was thrown into chaos. The house was filled with the constant noise of their children, the scent of Kylie's expensive perfume, the low murmur of Hudson's business calls. They were no longer guests, they were residents. The attacks began subtly. One morning, Hudson sat across from me at the kitchen table, a sheaf of papers and a smug expression on his face. "I had my lawyer do a little genealogical research," he said, sliding a folder toward me. "It's fascinating. Turns out, since our great-grandmother was Ruth Carrington's younger sister, the Mallister line has a legitimate ancestral claim to this land. This is just a preliminary document, a recognition of shared heritage. A gesture of goodwill, really." I looked at the document, at the legal jargon designed to intimidate and confuse. "This land was never part of the Mallister estate," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "A legal gray area," Hudson countered with a dismissive wave of his hand. "We just want to make sure the family legacy is properly preserved for the next generation." I didn't touch the folder. A few days later, the war moved online. An anonymous post appeared on a local Asheville community forum. The title read, "Local Artisan's Success Story Built on Disputed Family Land." The post was filled with intimate details about Carrington Hill, details only someone living in the house could know. It hinted at a brewing legal battle, at an estranged family member who had unethically claimed sole ownership of a shared ancestral property. The post was shared by dozens of anonymous accounts, all created within the last week. It was Kylie's handiwork, a modern, digital smear campaign designed to undermine my reputation in the community I had come to call home. The calls started trickling in. A student from my pottery class asking if the rumors were true. A gallery owner who had been considering my work, now hesitant to get involved in a family dispute. The physical invasion followed. I woke one morning to the sight of a man in a high-visibility vest driving stakes into the ground along the edge of the lavender field. He was a surveyor. Hudson had hired him to clarify the original property lines for a potential co-ownership reassignment. The final blow came in the form of a certified letter from my bank. Due to a formal inquiry filed by a party claiming partial ownership based on ancestral lineage, it read, "A temporary hold has been placed on the account associated with your property, Carrington Hill. All major transactions, including the sale of the property or using it as collateral, are restricted pending a legal review." My hands were shaking as I read the letter. They had done it. They had found a way to paralyze me, to choke off my financial independence, to trap me in my own home. That night, I sat at my wheel, a lump of wet clay spinning uselessly between my trembling hands. I couldn't center it. I couldn't find my own center. The piece I had worked so hard to build had been shattered. I looked around my studio, at the shelves lined with the physical proof of my hard-won life. I looked at the warm glow of the kiln, a symbol of the transformative fire I had walked through. And I whispered to the quiet, listening dark no. Not again. I would not be the quiet, accommodating girl on the folding chair. They had mistaken my piece for weakness. They were about to learn how wrong they were. For 2 weeks, I lived in a state of hypervigilance. I documented everything. Every condescending remark from Clara, every veiled threat from Hudson, every saccharine sweet, manipulative comment from Kylie. I started carrying a small, discreet digital audio recorder in my pocket. I saved every text, every email. I felt like a spy in my own home, gathering intelligence for a war I never wanted to fight. My lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Sarah Jenkins, confirmed my worst fears. They're building a case based on nuisance and confusion, she explained over the phone. The document Hudson filed, this recognition of shared heritage, is legally meaningless, but it's enough to clog up the courts. They're trying to make it so expensive and so exhausting for you to fight that you'll be forced to settle. The edited video appeared a few days later. It was a 30-second clip taken from the security camera I had installed in my studio. It showed me at my most vulnerable, a moment from weeks before their arrival, when a particularly meaningful piece had cracked in the kiln. In the full video, I had cried quietly, then swept up the pieces. In Kylie's edited version, it was a scene of pure rage. The video was cleverly cut to make it look like I was screaming, wild-eyed and unhinged, hurling the broken pottery against the wall. The caption on the social media post read, "Local artist has violent breakdown amid family inheritance dispute." So sad to see such instability. It was a masterpiece of character assassination. The video spread like wildfire through local online groups. My class enrollment dropped. A commission was canceled. I felt the walls of my life closing in. That night, I sat on the floor of my studio, my dogs resting their heads in my lap, and I let myself cry. I cried for my mother, for my lost family, for the quiet life they were systematically destroying. But as the tears subsided, something else took their place, a cold, hard rage. A rage that was clarifying. The next morning, I packed a box with every piece of evidence I had collected, the recordings, the screenshots, the bank letters, the forged document, the full, unedited video footage from my studio. I drove to Sarah's office and placed the box on her desk. "They think they can break me," I said, my voice low and steady. "They think if they make me look crazy, if they make this too hard, I'll just give up and give them what they want." I looked her straight in the eye. I am not going to give up. I want to fight back. Not just defensively. I want to go on the offensive. Sarah opened the box, her expression grim as she sorted through the files. She looked up at me, a slow, determined smile spreading across her face. "Good," she said, "because I think we have more than enough here to do just that." Our counterattack was not loud or aggressive. It was quiet, strategic, and devastating. We didn't respond to the online gossip. We didn't engage with their provocations. Instead, we prepared. I planned an event at Carrington Hill. I called it an open studio and community conversation. I sent invitations to local gallery owners, journalists, community leaders, and every single one of my students and customers. The invitation promised a special collection viewing and an honest conversation about art, legacy, and the meaning of home. The day of the event, the farm was buzzing with people. Clara, Hudson, and Kylie were there, of course, circulating through the crowd with practiced smiles, playing the part of the supportive, concerned family. They had no idea what was coming. Halfway through the afternoon, I stepped up to a small podium I had set up in the center of my studio. I thanked everyone for coming. Then, my voice calm and clear, I said, "Before we talk about art, I need to talk about truth." I pressed a button on my laptop. A large screen behind me flickered to life. The first thing the audience heard was a crystal clear audio recording. It was Clara's voice, from the day of my mother's funeral. "You have no right to be here, Natalie. You're not one of us anymore." A stunned silence fell over the room. Clara's face went white. Next, I played the full, unedited footage from my studio security camera, the scene Kylie had twisted into a violent breakdown. The audience saw me discover the broken pot, saw my quiet tears, saw me carefully sweep the shards into a dustpan. They saw the truth. Then, I projected the documents, Hudson's recognition of shared heritage with its forged signatures, the bank letter freezing my accounts, the anonymous online posts traced back to an IP address registered to Kylie's phone. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't editorialize. I simply presented the evidence, piece by piece, building a quiet, irrefutable case. When I was finished, I looked out at the sea of shocked faces. This farm, this studio, this life, I said, was not inherited. It was built. It was built from the ashes of a family that discarded me. They have come here not to reclaim a legacy, but to seize a property. They have used lies, manipulation, and public humiliation as their tools. But they have made one critical mistake. I paused, letting my words sink in. They forgot that I am a creator. And I have just created a narrative of my own, one that is made not of lies, but of truth. The aftermath was immediate. A journalist from the Asheville Citizen-Times who was in the audience published a front-page story the next day. The headline read, "The Potter's Stand. Local artist exposes families bid to seize her land." The community rallied around me. Kylie's event planning business was flooded with negative reviews. Hudson's real estate firm was forced to issue a public statement distancing themselves from his personal family matters. The bank immediately lifted the hold on my accounts and launched an internal investigation into the fraudulent claim. A week later, they were gone. They packed their suitcases in the dead of night and left without a word. Clara left a single, venomous note on the kitchen counter. "You have chosen to destroy your own family in public. I hope you are proud of what you have done." I folded the note and placed it in the empty kiln. I didn't burn it. I just left it there, in the cold, dark space where things are transformed or broken. The legal battle ended not with a dramatic courtroom showdown, but with a quiet, decisive victory. Faced with irrefutable evidence of fraud and a mountain of negative publicity, the Malisters agreed to a settlement. They signed a legally binding document relinquishing any and all claims to Carrington Hill, now and forever. They issued a formal, public apology for the misunderstandings and emotional distress they had caused. It was a sterile, lawyer-approved statement, devoid of any real remorse, but it was a victory nonetheless. In the months that followed, a profound quiet settled over the farm. It was a different kind of quiet than the one I had known in my cabin. It wasn't the quiet of solitude, but the quiet of peace. The lavender fields bloomed, a sea of fragrant purple under the summer sun. Salt and indigo chased butterflies through the tall grass. My classes were full again, my online shop busier than ever. I began a new collection of work. I took the shards of the broken pot from that terrible day and, using the Japanese art of kintsugi, I mended it with gold lacquer. The cracks were not hidden, they were highlighted, a testament to the fact that something could be broken and still be beautiful, perhaps even more beautiful for having been broken. The piece, which I titled The Art of Mending, became the centerpiece of a solo exhibition at a gallery in Asheville. One afternoon, a car I didn't recognize pulled into my driveway. A woman I didn't know got out and walked hesitantly toward the studio. She was older, with kind, tired eyes. "Are you Natalie Carrington?" she asked. I nodded. "My name is Eleanor Vance," she said. "I was a friend of your mother's a long time ago. I read the article about you in the paper. I wanted to tell you how proud she would have been." Tears pricked my eyes for the first time in a long time. We sat on the porch and drank tea, and she told me stories about my mother I had never heard, stories of her quiet strength, her secret dreams, her fierce, protective love for me. "She was trapped in that family, you know," Eleanor said softly. "She didn't have the strength to break free, but she always hoped you would." After she left, I walked out to the lavender field. The air was thick with the scent my mother had loved. I knelt down and ran my hands through the fragrant blossoms. I was not the ghost in my family's story anymore. I was the author of my own. I had faced the fire and had not been consumed. I had been transformed. My family never reached out again, and I never sought them out. The space they left in my life was no longer a wound, but a scar, a pale, silvery reminder of a battle fought and won. I learned that true family isn't about the blood you share, but about the people who see you, who champion you, who offer you a safe harbor in the storm. And sometimes, the most important family you can ever belong to is the one you build within yourself, a quiet, resilient place founded on self-respect, integrity, and the courage to say, This is my home. This is my life. And I am enough.